Hi everyone, this is the student perspective presentation on standardized testing. I'm presenting on behalf of Robin Feeney, Kevin Walczek, and myself, Thomas Davis. Our intro slide just establishes the context of standardized testing in that not everybody is consistent with a standard, and how do you play to everybody's strengths and not obviously be playing to their weaknesses only. To start defining the problem, we looked at the current situation. So a student taking a standardized test has to deal with a number of things. On the right hand side of our diagram here, you can see that they have to deal with anxiety. That's anxiety from taking the test itself, of course. The student anxiety, their feelings about themselves, the feeling on test day. But contributing to that is the anxiety they get from home, the pressure to do well. We've mentioned teacher anxiety, and by teacher anxiety we're really talking to the fact that teachers, administrators, principals, the school environment can be fairly stressed by a standardized test or the importance of the results and how that plays out. And so by virtue of the fact that the environment around the student is a stressful one, it adds to the pressure on the student on test day and leading up to that, which will, of course, will affect their performance. Some issues around standardized testing, just from a top to bottom perspective here. Students don't actually receive much in the way of feedback. If you're going to take a test, you have to ask, what's the point of the test? If the test is going to identify some strengths and weaknesses, that's one thing. But if I'm not getting any feedback, then why am I taking the test? Teaching and of course, the one point is you want to improve, so you need to be able to incorporate that feedback for improving future performance. You can end up in a situation where you're teaching for the test and not teaching for learning. In my own background, we train people to pass a test, even though we're really trying to train them to do a job. We know they won't be allowed to do the job unless they can pass the license exams. So first we actually have to program people to pass the test, and programming is probably about the right word. And then you have to deprogram them a bit in order to be able to actually do the job, because there's different demands. And I can only imagine that in the school environment and in elementary and secondary schools, there's a certain amount of anxiety that around the test, that from the teacher's perspective, that they end up teaching specifically to pass a test, as opposed to trying to maximize learning in the classroom. Tests are often taken now with, or almost exclusively, I think, with pen and paper, and that's not necessarily the ideal format, considering students hardly ever write anymore. They're very much typing on their phones, their tablets, their laptops, and so maybe using technology will allow them to lessen their anxiety, but also to just put them in a more familiar environment. What does the test do for me? What's the context of the test? Why is the student taking the test? How is it relevant to them? It's relevant to the school board. It's relevant to the school. It's maybe relevant to the parents, but I sometimes wonder where the standardized test results are helping the child themselves. And then finally, you've got a situation where you've got students that are legitimately underperforming. Perhaps they've got disabilities of one form or another. Children that come to school without breakfast are automatically likely to underperform. So you've got legitimately underperforming students who have the sense they're going to fail the test before they even take it. And that's an obstacle to students feeling better about themselves and trying to accomplish better on these tests. So that's the current situation. The desired situation, well, ideally we'd like to have feedback on strengths and AFIs being areas for improvement. And the feedback, of course, will depend on the age of the student in terms of the complexity. Feedback should be used by all parties involved, the student, the teacher, the parents, so that they can build and develop those areas for improvement. Standardized tests employ technologies students regularly use. So if kids are using their electronic devices, then maybe the test should be in electronic device format. Standardized tests need to perform a fair test of student knowledge and abilities. Francois' article suggested that in some cases, in the desire to develop standardized tests, the test questions don't actively reflect the subject matter the students were taught, not really covered in the textbook, for example. Standardized testing provides necessary accommodations. Standardized testing should provide necessary accommodations and modifications to meet individual student learning needs. So students have individual education plans. The details of those education plans should be developed so that the students get the assistance they would normally receive on a day-to-day basis available to them in writing the test. Of course, we want minimal anxiety for all stakeholders. So there has to be a way to lessen the anxiety that not only the students feel, but all those around the students feel, in order to help the students perform better on test day. So what resources do the students have to help improve? The standard bank of practice resources and materials available to the ministry, from the ministry, test banks, sample questions, sample tests, that kind of thing, that allow the students to practice. Hopefully those provided samples are exactly along the lines of what the students will face on test day. Of course, formats sometimes change, so you want to make sure that any samples that are sent out are at the same level of difficulty and same amount of rigor that the actual test material has. There's also, of course, for-profit practice resources and materials. So there's a large number of organizations that, if you're willing to write a check, can assist you in preparing for these tests. The downside, of course, is that we're now creating a two-tier system, those that can afford to get better help and preparation for the test, and those that can't. There's also some test-taking resources. A variety of supports and individual accommodations should be available to the test taker who need them. So there could be assistive software for people that have impairments of one kind or another. They may need some additional assistance on test day, and that should be made available to them. So possible solutions to the problems we've posed. We want to go beyond a single standardized assessment. Instead of capturing just a snapshot in time and building so much stress around it, there needs to be an opportunity for a student to come back, because how often do we all have a bad day? And if there's a lot of pressure and stress on you, then the more frequently that we can take a test, the more familiar we are with the test taking, time management, etc. So there's a number of skills that are built in there. So ideally we would want to get away from one-time testing, and by doing that I don't mean that once every 3 or 4 years is more than once. Standardized tests that are designed to provide a fair test of student knowledge and abilities. As before, we want to make sure that the student preparation matches the subject matter that's on the test. Students, again, should be receiving feedback, and in fact, online feedback. We've got tremendous technology available to us. The test can be graded, it can be established how it compares to other tests in their school or provincially wide. And so we can give very good feedback to the student on how they performed in relation to others, and then highlight specifically their strengths and areas to work on. The feedback then can be the basis for a remediation plan. A big part of taking the test is not just about the preparation, but it's where your mind is at the day of test, when test day comes. So reducing student stress and anxiety is really important, and with technology available to us, there's a couple of things that we can do to improve student performance. by providing the opportunity for testing through useful tools that they're familiar with, things that they're using on a day-to-day basis. We want them to be familiar with their environment. And that's not just a case of using a tablet or a laptop. It's also a case of posing questions in a manner that they're familiar with. We've got a little diagram of Dora the Explorer on the side there, and I think most of us are familiar with Dora asking the young child, can you do this, or etc. And but it puts it in a very non-threatening, less stressful approach. So by putting things in a familiar format, using technology, using video, using the resources available to us, it can help students connect and relate to the test a little bit better. Providing the graphics and animations that are relatable can further help students in their understanding. So one example is why standardized tests don't measure educational quality. By providing more efficient ways of capturing student responses, students are not used to writing with pen and paper anymore. In fact, cursive writing seems to be something we're dropping away from. I can't keep track of how fast my daughter's thumbs work. So maybe that's the instrument that she should be taking a test on. Just to round out our presentation, we want to improve student attitude and motivation. Students really need to buy in to taking the test. So we want to have students play a role in the co-construction of test goals and design, or at least some of their peers perhaps to be consulted. From a practice perspective, maybe it's helpful if your friends ask you questions for the test, so you can work with your peers. Improve student buy-in to the test by having them visualize themselves in the role they're required to test in. This doesn't just mean grade 3 students. This means lawyers prospective lawyers taking the LSATs. You need to visualize yourself in the job you want, not where you are now. And just a little bit of psychology to help you be more successful. Test questions can use familiar references, hence Dora the Explorer, as I mentioned, and allow for increased individual student accommodation and motivations. We want students to have every opportunity and support that they can on the day of the test. And finally, we need a more relaxed environment, both at home and in the school environment in the weeks and days leading up to the test. So with all of that in mind, both technology and psychology, we should be able to help students be more motivated in taking the test and be more successful on test day. Thank you very much. We look forward to your questions.